Hello and a very warm welcome to the analyst dated 23rd July 2025, brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi, wherein we'll be covering the 7 set of current affairs issues which have featured in today's newspaper. And the handout of this very discussion is available in the description below for your future reference. Beginning with the analysis section, firstly, we'll be gauging India's progress towards the idea of financial inclusion and the challenges with respect to the same. Moving on to the second topic, we'll try and understand that why, despite having laws in place, India still continues to witness the inhuman practice of manual scavenging. Moving on to the simplified section, herein we'll be covering the 5 set of current affairs issues in the most simple manner possible, and we'll also be doing the relevant value addition which would be needed for your prelims examination. So stay tuned. So let's begin with the first topic, which is related to the idea of financial inclusion. This particular topic we can relate with GS paper 3, especially the topic inclusive growth. Now, why are we discussing this idea of financial inclusion? Because RBI has released this year financial inclusion index. Now, before we understand that what is this index all about and what is our performance when it comes to this particular index, let's just first understand what is this concept of financial inclusion. So financial inclusion in simple terms basically covers the 3 A's. In simple terms I'm talking about. First A, availability. Do we have adequate number of financial products for the different segments of the Indian society or not, which are tailor-made to their specific needs also? Second A is accessibility. Whether the different kinds of financial products are accessible to every segment of the Indian society or not. And the third A is affordability. The different financial products that we have, is it affordable for the different segment of the Indian society? Now, apart from these 3 A's, we also need to take into account other factors. Only then we would be able to make considerable progress when it comes to this idea of financial inclusion. These 3 A's are not at all sufficient. Okay. We also need to make sure that we have financial literacy in place. When the different segments of the Indian society, they would be having financial literacy, only then we would witness a improvement in the usage of the financial products. Okay, this is needed. If I have opened an account but I don't know how to actually operate that account, then in real sense, we have not attained the idea of financial inclusion. So in order to attain this idea of financial inclusion in real sense, we need financial literacy that would give a boost to uses of financial products. Then we need an effective grievance redressal mechanism in place as well that would maintain and would further embolden the trust of the citizens when it comes to the financial system that we have in India. And lastly, we need effective coordination among the different entities which are regulating the financial sector. Okay, RBI, IRDAI, different banks, etc. So this is the idea of financial inclusion, wherein we are not just talking about the saving account, we are talking about insurance products, the pension related products, etc. Different kinds of financial products are being taken consideration when I discuss about the topic of financial inclusion. Now let's just look into about this particular index. Okay, what is this financial inclusion index all about? So it is a comprehensive index which would be covering not just the banking sector, it would be looking into insurance, investments, pensions and postal services. Okay, that is the reason I told you when I talk about financial inclusion, I don't just limit myself to banking related products. I also need to look into the this insurance related products, postal services related products, pension related products, etc. Okay, and this is what is being measured by this particular index. Now this particular index would be measuring the reach as well as the depth of financial inclusion across India. What do I mean by reach? Remember, accessibility. Okay, here as you can see. And depth would be measured by the quality of the financial products and their uses. Quality basically means, do we have tailor-made financial products for different segment of the Indian society based on their needs or not? Then this particular index would be giving you a score between 0 to 100. 0 means complete exclusion, 100 means complete financial inclusion. So these are the dimensions which are measured when it comes to this particular index. Okay, accessibility, uses and quality, and these are the weightage which is assigned to these particular dimensions. Now let's just look into India's performance when it comes to this year financial inclusion index. So we know that this index is released by RBI. So this year we have made great improvement when it comes to our performance in this particular index. So we have improved from roughly 64 in 2024 to 67 in March 2025 this year. And the good part is this improvement is in this index that we have shown is not merely on the account of improvement of accessibility dimension. This year the improvement is basically because of the improvement that we have done in the uses and the quality parameter. Okay, so this highlights what? Deepening of the financial services in the Indian economy. Okay, so this would enable us to ensure last mile delivery of the financial products, and since we are not just focusing upon the accessibility, we have made great improvement when it comes to quality as well as the uses of the financial products. This ensures that we are moving in the direction of holistic progress when it comes to the financial inclusion. Now, having understood this particular index, let's just understand the other dimension, that why the government is focusing upon financial inclusion first of all. So financial inclusion is needed first of all to plug the credit gap. When it comes to the MSMEs, which is a labor intensive sector, we have a credit gap of 25 lakh crore. Why? Because according to the RBI committee report, only 14% of the MSMEs have access to formal credit. However, the number are quite high if you look into US 50%, China 37%. So when we will be having financial inclusion, then only we'll be able to make sure that the MSMEs, which is a labor intensive sector, they have access to adequate credit facility. And when they'll be able to get adequate credit facility, they would be generating a lot of livelihood opportunities, especially in the rural areas. Okay, so this is first importance. Then it would be improving the saving habits. Now see, if I have cash, we all know when we have cash, we have the tendency to spend money. Okay, so this reduces our savings. But what if I keep that money in my lockers? Does that not help in improving the investment scenario? The answer is no. Because that money which you have kept in the locker, or the gold that you buy and you put it in your locker, that could not be given to another person who actually need loan. Okay, which with the help of that loan, that person might be, thinking of making investment in the Indian economy. But the same money, if I deposit with the bank is known for credit creation. So the bank would be giving that same money to another person who would be in need of loan, who would further be using that particular money to give a boost to investment. Okay, so this would help us in enhancing the capital formation. Then if we improve the saving habits among the different segments of the Indian society, this would also enable us to enhance financial stability. How come? For this I need to know the concept of credit to deposit ratio. Simply, it is telling us what all loans the bank has given vis-a-vis the deposit which the bank is happening. Okay. Now, if the bank is, let's suppose, giving loans, but that loan turned out into NPA, non-performing assets. But if the bank has adequate deposit base, more number of people are depositing the money, in rise of NPA, okay, if the bank has higher deposit base, it would be able to ensure financial stability. Okay, so that is another reason why we need to move in this direction of financial inclusion. Then another benefit is formalization of the Indian economy. With this financial inclusion only, we are now talking about cashless economy. Okay, and this cashless economy would go a long way in curbing black money and ultimately reducing the tax evasion. Then it is enabling us to plug the subsidy gap. Previously, what used to happen for a particular scheme, identification of beneficiaries was done by the bureaucrats. Money was also being transferred manually because a lot of people were not connected with the bank accounts. But with financial inclusion, we are able to give effect to DBT framework, direct benefit transfer. So now the money is directly being transferred into the beneficiary's bank account. And this has enabled the government to reduce the leakages of this much value, okay, between financial year 2022-23. Then when we talk about financial inclusion, if we focus upon the women especially, and that the government is already doing with the SHG bank linkage program. So when the SHGs, they would be able to get credit support from the formal banking sector. This would enable the woman to pursue different livelihood opportunity, and this would enable us to realize the idea of women empowerment. Okay, and ultimately this would enable us to meet the sustainable development goal number 5. Okay, so these are the importance of financial inclusion. Now, what is the current status of financial inclusion when it comes to India? We have understood with respect to index. Let's just look into the performance of Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, because it is a flagship scheme of government when it comes to the financial inclusion. So when it comes to this particular Yojana, we have been able to bring the unbanked areas within the banking fold. So 53 crore accounts roughly have been opened under this particular Yojana as of 2024, and 66% of these accounts have been actually been opened by the people who are living in the rural and the semi-urban areas. And we have also taken care of the women empowerment aspect. Okay, so 55% of the Jan Dhan Yojana accounts are basically belonging to women account holders. We have expanded the banking infrastructure. So if you go by the Jan Dhan Darshak app, according to this particular app, we have a banking outlet within the 5-kilometer radius, okay, in all the villages that we have in case of India. With the help of this particular Yojana, we have witnessed a 4-fold increase when it comes to saving, especially when you talk about the unbanked regions that were there as compared to what we used to witness in 2015. This has given boost to digital inclusion also. Okay, so 36 crore RuPay cards have been issued to the Jan Dhan account holders. And when you open the Jan Dhan account, you can easily access the other schemes which are also there, like Mudra scheme is there, like Atal Pension Yojana is there. Okay, so you can take the benefits of other schemes as well if you fall within the eligibility criteria. Now, if you go by this year economic survey, we have made great advancement when it comes to financial inclusion. We have roughly 53 crore bank accounts we have opened under this particular Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana. We have 1.3 lakh bank branches, more than this. We have roughly 5 to 6% of the population, that is 7.7 crore of the people have credit cards, and we have roughly 25 ATMs per lakh adult in 2022. So this is something that you can draw if you're writing an answer on financial inclusion. Now let's just look into other initiatives also. So we have the Pradhan Mantri Suraksha Bima Yojana, wherein we are focusing upon providing accidental death and disability insurance. Then we have Atal Pension Yojana, which is basically, catering to the pension demands of the organized sector workers, okay, based on their contribution. After the age of 60, they would be getting a monthly pension of 1,000 to 5,000 based upon their contribution as well. Then we have Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana, which is enabling the MSMEs to get the credit support from the banking sector. We have the JAM Trinity, okay, which has enabled us to do the identification of the beneficiaries, and this has enabled us to give effect to DBT framework. Then we have elaborated the banking system also. We have the small finance bank, wherein this particular bank would be majorly catering to small borrowers, okay, who want a loan up till 25 lakhs. Then we have payment banks, which would be again catering to the unbanked areas, okay. We are trying to promote the saving habits among those particular people, okay. And we have the priority sector lending norms, which basically incentivize the different banks to give loans to the priority sector, that is MSMEs, agriculture, vulnerable groups, etc. Then we have given boost to digital payments also. So this has made us realize the idea of cashless economy. So if you go by the annual report of RBI of financial year 2024, 80% of the digital payments in India are now being done through UPI. And we are also focusing upon the financial literacy also. So we have National Center for Financial Education, wherein we are organizing workshop, training, programs, and we are coming up with educational materials to basically give the financial literacy to different segments of the Indian society. Now, having understood the steps taken by the government, the importance of financial inclusion, what are the challenges which are still there, okay, when it comes to the financial inclusion? First and foremost is the digital divide. So if you go by the Oxfam India Inequality Report of 2022, we have digital divide when it comes to gender. So only 1/3 of Internet users are basically women in India. We have digital divide when it comes to rural and urban areas also. 31% of the population in rural areas know how to use internet. However, the number is 67 when it comes to urban areas. And the same digital divide we have when it comes to different caste also. Okay. Then we are not able to effectively realize the idea of cashless economy. Why? Because of rising instances of cyber frauds. So if you go by this RBI, report, it's point out that how the cyber frauds, the number has increased from roughly 73,000 in 2019-20 to roughly 3 lakh crores in 2023-24. This basically undermines the trust of the citizens when it comes to the UPI and the other apps that are there to carry out the digital payments. Then we have lack of financial literacy also. So 20% of the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana accounts are not being used at all. This points out to what? Lack of financial literacy, because I told you, if you have financial literacy, only then we can make sure that the financial products are being adequately being used. Then we are finding it difficult to carry out the KYC norms, especially for the migrant laborers. In their case, it is difficult to do the Aadhaar identification. Then it is difficult for the acid attack victims as well, because their face get deformed. And this was something which was highlighted by the Supreme Court also in Amar Jain versus Union of India case recently, this year only. Then we have issues with the credit access for the MSMEs also, because of lack of collateral, because of the complex loan approval process also. It is difficult for the MSMEs to get access to formal bank credit. And there are concerns with the last mile connectivity. We have ATMs, but they are non-functional. The banking correspondents, they are not working properly. We don't have a monitoring framework in place to monitor the activities of the banking correspondents as well. So these are the issues that we are witnessing. Now, what needs to be done in this particular background? So first and foremost, we need to bridge the digital divide. So we need to ensure effective implementation of BharatNet as well as PM Vani, and we need to make use of AI-based voice interface to make sure that the content is available in different languages as well. Then we need to enhance the cyber security framework to basically bring down the cyber frauds. For this, the government needs to increase its R&D on the indigenous technology, and we should also, increase the expenditure of the government with respect to addressing the cyber security personnel gap which is there. Then we need to promote financial literacy. Only then we will be able to ensure effective uses. And in this respect, we need to focus upon the women primarily. Then we need to simplify the KYC norms. So whatever directions the Supreme Court has given in Amar Jain versus Union of India case, that needs to be effectively implemented. We need to come up with other mechanism for carrying out the KYC authentication. Okay, so we can come up with video conferencing method. We can go for manual method also in case of exceptional cases like acid attack victims. So the directives given by the Supreme Court needs to be effectively implemented in order to realize the idea of a dignified life under Article 21. Then we need to strengthen the banking correspondent model. We need to come up with a monitoring framework for this banking correspondent model. Only then we will be able to realize the idea of last mile connectivity when it comes to ensuring last mile delivery of the financial products. Then we need to come up with the tailored made financial products, for example, Atal Pension Yojana that we have. Keeping in mind the diverse needs of the different segments of the Indian society, when the banks would be coming up with the tailor-made financial products, that would incentivize the different segments of the Indian society to actually make use of the different financial products. That's all that we need to know with regard to this particular topic. I have framed a practice question for you people. So based on what we have discussed, try and write this particular question. With this, let's move on to the next topic. Now, beginning with the second topic, which is related with the inhuman practice of manual scavenging in India. This particular topic we can relate with GS paper 2, issues relating to development of human resources. So what has happened recently? A social audit has pointed out that 90% of the workers who died while cleaning the sewers and the septic tanks, they do not have any safety gears or personalized protective equipment kits. Now in this respect, the first thing that we need to understand is, what is this manual scavenging all about? So manual scavenging basically refers to the practice of physically handling or cleaning human excreta. Especially you have to do this when you have dry insanitary latrines. Now we have a legal framework in place which prohibits the employment as manual scavengers and ensures their rehabilitation. We have the Act of 2013 which prohibits construction and use of insanitary latrines and mandates their conversion into a sanitary one. It talks about identifying the manual scavengers so that we can ensure their effective rehabilitation by providing them financial assistance and by providing them with the necessary skill training also, so that they can get a dignified, job. Then we have SC/ST Prevention of Atrocities Act also. Herein also we have criminalized the employment of scheduled caste as manual scavengers. But despite having these laws in place, we are still seeing this inhuman practice continuing when it comes to Indian society. Now, this inhuman practice is a grave violation of our human rights. It is a violation of Article 21, which talks about a dignified life. It violates Article 17, which talks about doing away with the caste prejudices, doing away with untouchability. But with the help of, because of this manual scavenging, what is happening? This caste prejudices are getting reinforced. Then it is a violation of Article 1, 2 and 3 of Universal Declaration of Human Rights as well. The manual scavengers are susceptible to a lot of health related issues also, like hepatitis, tetanus, cholera, and at times they even die while cleaning the septic tanks. According to the government data, between 2022 and 23, 150 manual scavengers basically died while cleaning the septic tanks. What all other challenges are faced by the manual scavengers? So they get trapped in the vicious cycle of poverty. Why? Because they get wages which are even less than the minimum wages. They actually work in an informal setting on a contractual basis. They get the work on a daily basis. So when they get less income, they actually get trapped into the vicious cycle of poverty. They are not able to come out of that. Even their children are forced to work as manual scavengers because they don't have income. They cannot invest in their education and health. Ultimately, they are also forced to work as manual scavengers. Then they have to face the social stigma. Okay, because the work that they are doing is not considered to be as a dignified work. I am talking with respect to the prejudices which are there when it comes to the different segments of the Indian society. Okay, very less people consider the work being done by the sanitation workers as a dignified work. So because of this, they have to face caste related stigma as well. And when the women actually work as manual scavengers, they have to witness double discrimination. First, because of the gender basis, so they have to face sexual harassment at workplace, and second, because of the caste, so they also have to face the caste related stigma. Now, let's just understand that why, despite having the legal framework in place, this inhuman practice is still continuing in the Indian society. First and the foremost reason is lack of data. Because when you will be having data, only then we can move in the direction of evidence-based policy making. But we don't have adequate data. Yesterday only, the Minister of Social Justice and Empowerment has replied on the floor of the House that we have not received any data with regard to manual scavengers when it comes to states, when it comes to UTs. So when you don't have data, you cannot effectively plan the policies for them. And the body which actually gives the data with respect to how many manual scavengers are dying, while cleaning the septic tanks, that is National Commission for Safai Karamcharis. This particular body is alleged that it is underreporting the deaths. And this allegation has been made by the Dalit Adivasi Shakti Adhikar Manch. So data is one problem. Then caste prejudices. Because of this, it is the SC people who have to actually end up working as manual scavengers. You will not see high caste people doing this particular work. Okay, so still because of this caste related prejudices which are still prevalent in the Indian society, the SC community is forced to work as the manual scavengers. Then because of the poor sewage design, we still have insanitary latrines in place when it comes to Indian Railways. And if you go by the data of 2018, approximately 4,000 million tons of human waste is being discharged when it comes to Indian Railways. Although they are trying to put in place bio toilets in place, but we have a long way to go. Then there is weak enforcement of the laws. Okay, the law that we talked about, that is prohibition of employment as manual scavengers. Despite this law in place, we are still witnessing that the people are being employed as manual scavengers because they don't have any other work related opportunity, and we have not seen any conviction on penalty being imposed under this particular act. And one provision which is mentioned under this particular act is providing safety gears and protection kits to the manual scavengers, and this provision is vehemently being violated, as we can see from today's news as well. Based on the social audit, what do we got to know? That 90% of the workers who died while cleaning the sewer tanks, they died because they lacked the safety gear. So we are seeing rampant violation of this particular law which is in place. Then there is blame game going on between the center and the state. The center state says that we cannot look into this particular issue because sanitation is a state subject. Okay, so because of this blame game going on between the center and the state also, we are not able to effectively safeguard the interest of the manual scavengers in India. Then the rehabilitation promise is not being implemented properly. Okay, in recent Dr. Balram Singh versus Union of India case, 2023 judgment of the Supreme Court talked about giving financial assistance to the people who die because of, while cleaning the septic tanks, or when they, develop some kind of disability while cleaning the septic tanks. So the Supreme Court talked about increasing the compensation, but that is not being done. So when a manual scavenger die and the state is not giving the due compensation, ultimately their children are also forced to work as manual scavenger. So this adds up to intergenerational inequality as well. Okay, and it is also because when the financial assistance is not being provided by the state, rehabilitation exercise is not being done properly by the state, the SC community, they don't have other venues of dignified work, and the same is the case with their children. Then let's just look into that what all steps we have taken. We have already discussed this act, and this particular act, Employment of Manual Scavengers and Construction of Dry Latrines Prohibition Act 1993. So under this, you would have to face penalties if you are employing any person as manual scavenger, and you will have to face penalties if you are constructing a dry insanitary latrine. Then we have different schemes also. For example, we have Namaste scheme, which is a central sector scheme wherein we are doing what? We are identifying the manual scavengers, we are registering them, and we are providing them with the safety gears, the PPE kits, etc. Then we have the Swachh Bharat Mission Urban 2.0, wherein the central government has given the financial, assistance to the states, that you use this particular money to move in the direction of mechanized cleaning of the septic and the sewer tanks which are there. Then we have dedicated institutions also. I named this particular institution National Commission for Safai Karamcharis. This particular institution is there to safeguard the interest of the manual scavenger. This particular entity basically advises the government with respect to the interest of the sanitation workers, the Safai Karamcharis, etc. And this is the body which looks into the implementation of the prohibition as manual scavengers and the Rehabilitation Act which is there. And this is the only body which maintains the data with respect to the sewer deaths in the entire country. Then we have the Supreme Court verdict under Dr. Balram Singh versus Union of India case. The Supreme Court has stated that the central as well as the state governments need to ensure full rehabilitation of the sanitation workers, so that with the help of skill training, they could get dignified livelihood opportunity. Then the Supreme Court has enhanced the compensation in case of sewer death or in case of any such disability that the workers, develop while cleaning the septic tanks. Then the Supreme Court has also given this directive to the center and the state that you carry out a comprehensive national survey within 1 year, so that we can get adequate data with respect to the number of manual scavengers that are there, and so that we can move in the direction of evidence-based policy making. Then it also talked about effective coordination among these bodies which are there to protect the interest of the sanitation workers, and they should actually, provide adequate skill training to the sanitation workers. They should make the sanitation workers, the manual scavengers, aware about their rights, okay, that they are not allowed to enter into the sewage tank or the septic tanks until unless they get the safety gears or the PPE kits. Then we have also seen certain technological intervention which is enabling us to move in the direction of mechanized cleaning of the sewage tanks. So we have Bandicoot robot which automates the sewer cleaning, inspection, removing the need of the human entry at all. We have Endobot and Swasth AI which detects the water contamination, leakage and sewer overflow in pipelines. Robo drain system is there, which is designed for underground sewer cleaning. Vacuum trucks are there, which would be employing powerful suction to remove sewage safely without manual effort. So these technological innovations are also being put in place. Now, apart from these steps which have already been taken, what more needs to be done so that we can adequately eradicate this inhuman practice of manual scavenging which is still continuing in India? First and foremost, we need to make sure that these technological interventions that we discuss right now are being effectively put into use in every nook and corner of India. So for this, the central government should provide adequate financial assistance for the states so that they can make sure that everywhere we are seeing mechanized cleaning of the sewage and the septic tanks. Then we need to do capacity building, basically rehabilitation of the manual scavenger. The state government needs to effectively implement the rehabilitation promise that has been made under the Act so that these manual scavengers and in future their children also, they can get some dignified work. Upgrading the sanitation infrastructure. So the railways need to put in place the bio toilets and we need to completely do away with the insanitary and dry latrines which are there. Then we need to carry out the survey and the identification of manual scavenger, giving effect to the Supreme Court verdict that we have discussed, Dr. Balram Singh versus Union of India case, so that we have the adequate data and we can move in the direction of evidence-based policy making. Lastly, we can also adopt the global best practices which are there. For example, in UK, they ensure strict legal enforcement of the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. Wherein the sanitation workers are not allowed to enter into the sewage tanks without the adequate PPE and kits and the safety gears. Then we can also learn from US, wherein they are providing adequate training, capacity building of the sanitation workers, and they have advanced occupational safety. So they have CCTVs to monitor the sewage tanks and identify the blockage. We have, smart sewer system in Japan, wherein they are making use of the AI to effectively identify where all we are seeing the blockages so that we don't have to see emergency manual entry. Lastly, we can also learn from Japan the smart sewer system that they have, wherein they put in place advanced filtration technology which basically prevents manual entry in the sewage tanks. Okay, so that's all we need to know with regard to this particular topic. I have framed a practice question for you people. So based on whatever we have discussed, try and practice this particular question. With this, let's move on to the simplified section. So beginning with the simplified section, the first article is related with the removal of judges because the Congress has stated that we were the one who got the support of the MPs with respect to introduction of a motion for removal of the High Court judge, that is Yashwant Verma. This particular topic we can relate with the polity section of our prelim syllabus. Now, why this removal motion is being introduced against this High Court judge? Because huge piles of half-burned currency notes were found at its residence when a fire broke out in his residence. And three reasons are being mentioned under this removal motion against this High Court judge. That is financial misconduct and lack of transparency, unnatural conduct and concealment, and breach of public trust and probity. Now, for our exam perspective, I need to know which all constitutional article deals with the removal of Supreme Court and High Court judges and what is the entire process. So, when I talk about removal of Supreme Court judge, we have Article 124, subclause 4 of the Indian Constitution, which clearly states that a Supreme Court judge could be removed only on two grounds: proved misbehavior and incapacity. And Supreme Court judge could be removed only by an order of the President, which could be issued by the President only after the address by each house of the Parliament, wherein the removal motion against that Supreme Court judge is supported by special majority in both the houses. What do we mean by special majority? A majority of total membership of that house and a majority of not less than 2/3 of the members of the house present and voting. And when it comes to proving this thing, the grounds of proof misbehavior and incapacity with respect to a Supreme Court judge, the Parliament has been given this power under Article 124, subclause 5 of the Indian Constitution, that Parliament can come up with the law, okay, that how we are gonna investigate these grounds with respect to a Supreme Court judge. When you talk about the removal of High Court judge, we have Article 217, Clause B of the Indian Constitution, which says that High Court judge also could be removed on two grounds: proved misbehavior and incapacity. And we have Article 218 of the Indian Constitution, which clearly states that Clause 4 and Clause 5 of Article 124 would be applicable to High Court judges as well. Okay, so the same process we have for High Court judges. Now, as we discuss, Article 124 Clause 5 gives Parliament the power that it can come up with the law that how we would be investigating the grounds of proved misbehavior and incapacity. So, exercising this power, the Parliament came up with the Judges Inquiry Act of 1968, wherein when it comes to introducing a motion for the removal of Supreme Court or High Court judge, you need support of 100 members if the motion is being introduced in Lok Sabha. You need support of 50 members if the motion is being introduced in Rajya Sabha. And it is totally up to the discretion of the presiding member in the respective house that whether they would be admitting or rejecting the removal motion. And if the presiding officer admits the motion, then an inquiry committee would be constituting, which would be having 3 members. One would be Supreme Court judge, one High Court Chief Justice or a High Court judge, or one distinguished jurist as well. Now, based upon the report of this particular inquiry committee, it would be decided that whether the matter should be continued further or not. If the committee states that no, the judge has not been found guilty or with respect to the 2 grounds, proved misbehavior and incapacity, then the motion would be dropped. And if the committee founds that yes, the judge has done something wrong based on these 2 grounds, proved misbehavior and incapacity, then the report would be tabled in the Houses of the Parliament. Each house have to pass that removal motion by special majority. And if the 2 houses pass the motion by special majority, then the president would be issuing the order for the removal of that Supreme Court or High Court judge. Remember that this entire process has not been elaborated in the constitution. The entire procedure has been mentioned under the Judges Inquiry Act of 1968. Now, one more prelim pointer that I need to make note of is, till today, no judge, whether it is High Court or Supreme Court judge, has been impeached so far. For the first time, the impeachment process was initiated against a judge, that is Justice V. Ramaswamy, and the inquiry committee found him guilty of proved misbehavior, but ultimately the impeachment or the removal motion failed in Lok Sabha due to lack of special majority. Okay, because the Congress party abstained from voting. That is why, because of lack of adequate support, this removal motion could not be passed. Now, we have a PYQ with respect to this particular aspect. So, do practice this question and let us know your answers in the comment section. With this, let's move on to the next topic. Now, this next topic is tracking India's progress with respect to its climate goals. This particular topic we can correlate with the environment section of our prelim syllabus. Now, a few days back, we have discussed that how India has achieved one of its important climate goal 5 years ahead of the target. And what was that? That we have to make sure that non-fossil fuel sources should account for more than 50% of the installed electricity generation capacity. Now, the article is pointing out that what is India's progress when it comes to the other climate goals that we have put in front of us under the Paris Agreement. So, the other promises were reducing the emission intensity, that is how much emission we are making per unit of GDP. We have to reduce it by 45% from what we used to witness in 2005. And we have to create an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent from forest and tree cover. Now, this article is pointing out, taking reference from India State of Forest Report of 2021, that we are close to attain this particular target as well. Okay, as you can see, we are close to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent of forest cover. Okay, so writer is saying that yes, we would be, easily be able to meet this particular climate goal also. So we are making good progress when it comes to the third target. Now, let's just look into that what all other promises we have put in front of us under the Paris Agreement. So we have to make sure that by 2030, 500 gigawatt of energy is being generated from non-fossil fuel sources. This we have already attained, this we are close to attaining. Then we have to see that what is our progress when it comes to reducing the emission intensity with respect to GDP and net zero by 2070. You have to tell me that does this net zero carbon emission actually means that we are not going to emit carbon dioxide at all? Please let me know in the comment section what do you understand by this particular concept. Now, when it comes to one of the promise that we have put in front of us, that we would be producing 500 gigawatt of electricity from non-fossil fuel sources by 2030. It is difficult to materialize this particular goal. Why? Because in order to meet this particular goal, we need to make great advancement when it comes to the nuclear power. And the 10 nuclear reactors that India is currently building, the writer is saying that this would enable us to enhance the electricity being generated from nuclear power, that is 17 gigawatt by 2030. But this is not enough to meet this particular target of 500 gigawatt by non-fossil fuel sources. Why? Because when it comes to renewable energy, it is intermittent in nature. You cannot get 24/7 electricity supply. And another issue is, as has been highlighted by the Central Electricity Authority, that when it comes to non-fossil fuel sources, including large hydro and nuclear power plant, only 28% of the electricity is being generated from these non-fossil fuel sources. And electricity itself form a very small part of the energy basket. Less than 22% of India's total energy consumption is being done from electricity. Okay, rest is being met from where? By burning the fossil fuels like oil, coal and gas. So this implies what? That clean energy from non-fossil fuel sources merely account for 6% of India's total energy consumption. That is the reason the writer is pointing out that this particular goal that we have put in front of us, that we will make sure that 500 gigawatt of electricity is being generated from non-fossil fuel sources, it is difficult to achieve. Now let's look into our progress when it comes to emission intensity. So the latest emission intensity data that we have of 2020, based on that data, we have already reduced our emission intensity by 36% if you compare it with respect to 2005 level. So in this respect, again, the writer is saying that, you know, we would be able to attain our target, that we would be able to reduce our emission intensity by 45% as compared to what we used to witness in 2005. Okay, now in this respect, the writer is pointing out that India has made great advancement when it comes to the climate goals, and India has stated that it can do much more if it was provided with the requisite international finance and the technology support from the developed nations under the provision of the Paris Agreement. Now let's make note of certain prelim pointers with regard to this Paris Agreement, okay, because this is highly in news. So this was adopted at COP21, which was organized in Paris, France. So it was adopted in 2015, but it came into force in 2016. 195 countries basically supported this Paris Agreement, and India had signed and well as rectified it in 2016 only. Is it legal binding? Yes. What are the main goals? That we have to limit the global warming well below 200 degrees Celsius. Preferably, we have to bring it down to 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels, so that we can avoid extreme climatic events like intense heat waves, severe drought and rainfall, and frequent climate related disasters. Now, how it actually works? This agreement basically works with a 5-year cycle. Now, countries would be submitting their nationally determined contribution. They plan to reduce emission and adapt to climate change. Each new NDC must be more ambitious than the last, and COP27 urged the countries to strengthen their NDCs, okay, at the end of 2023. When you talk about the nationally determined contribution, what the countries are actually doing under this, so they would be outlining that how they are going to reduce their greenhouse gas emission and how they plan to adapt to climate related impacts, extreme weather events that we are witnessing. So they would be aligning their short-term action with the Paris temperature goals. Like we are reducing our emission intensity when it comes to our GDP compared to 2005 levels. Now, under this agreement, how the countries were supposed to support each other? So the developed countries were supposed to provide the vulnerable nations, developing nations, with climate finance worth $100 billion a year by 2020. And they were supposed to support these nations with regard to mitigation measures, which could help us in reducing the CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions, and adaptation measures, how we can adapt to the climate related effects. For example, disaster resilient infrastructure. Okay, that is a adaptation measure. Then they were supposed to support each other in the technological front also, promoting the transfer of technology, and they were supposed to do the capacity building also, helping the developing countries build climate resilience and emphasis on training, knowledge and institutional strengthening as well. Now, we have a PYQ with regard to the Paris Agreement. Do solve this question, and based on the knowledge that you have gained after this discussion, try and attempt this question and let us know the answer in the comment section. With this, let's move on to the next topic. Now, recently, China has declared that it would be developing the largest hydropower project near Yarlung Zampo. This particular topic we can associate with GS paper 2, especially India and its neighborhood relation. Now, this particular hydropower project which the China has declared that it would be building would be even massive than the Three Gorges Dam. It would be 3 times the size of Three Gorges Dam. Now, why it is a concern for India? Because this hydropower project would be developed by China just before the river bends into Arunachal Pradesh as Brahmaputra. So, this would be subjecting the Siang region, when it comes to Arunachal Pradesh, vulnerable to water bomb. Why water bomb? Because we are not aware of the storage capacity of this particular hydropower project. And what if they suddenly release the water? So this could lead to flood-like situation when it comes to the Siang region. And another kind of threat is also there. What if they block the flow of the water? Then also it would be problematic for agriculture related activities. For example, when it comes to Brahmaputra, it brings the silt which is crucial for the agriculture. So if they are going to block the flow of Brahmaputra river, so this would be severely impacting the biodiversity as well as agriculture activities in this region. And this would also be having an impact on the energy security when it comes to India. Why? Because northeastern region actually holds nearly half of India's 133 gigawatt of hydropower potential. And even today, 80% of this potential remains untapped. So if we want to, utilize this potential of hydropower that we have, especially in the northeast region, we need that we take some countermeasure against this Chinese activity, okay, the hydropower project that they are developing. Now, to counter this, what India has planned, that it would be coming up with a very strong storage-based dam in the Siang district, which would be acting in both the ways. If China release more water, then the storage dam would be storing that water, avoiding flood-like situation in Arunachal Pradesh. And if they don't release water at all, so the storage dam would be releasing the water so that we can meet the agriculture related needs, okay. But the problem is, it has been 3 years since we announced that, okay, we are going to develop a storage based dam in this Siang region of Arunachal Pradesh. But because of the local community opposition, we have not been able to make great advancement when it comes to developing this particular storage based dam. But according to the government, once this is completed, okay, the Upper Siang project is completed, it would be India's largest hydropower station. Now, what we need to know with respect to prelims, certain pointers with regard to Brahmaputra river, because previously also UPSC has asked a question with regard to Brahmaputra river. So when you talk about Brahmaputra river, it basically covers a basin area of roughly 5,80,000 square kilometer, and majority of it is basically falling in China, merely 50%, and then India 33%. When you talk about the flow of this river in India, this covers basically this particular area, and whatever basin area is falling in India, it is roughly 5 to 6% of India's total land area. These are the states through which the Brahmaputra actually flows, that is Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, Meghalaya, Nagaland, Sikkim and West Bengal. You need to make note of this particular pointer because you can get a question with respect to this thing also, that from which of the following states Brahmaputra river actually flows. Now, when I talk about the origin of this particular river, so it originates from Shema Yungdung Glacier, which is situated at the east of Mansarovar Lake in the Kailash ranges of Tibet. So in Tibet, it flows in a eastward direction, as you can see from here, as Yarlung Zampo. And then it makes a sharp U-turn, this great U-bend, as you can see here, okay, at Namcha Barwa. And then it enters into India, basically the Arunachal Pradesh state of India, as Siang River. And then it is joined by different tributaries, left bank tributaries, Dibang, Lohit, right bank tributaries, Subanshri, Kameng, Manas, Sankosh. And then it flows into Bangladesh near the Dhubri region of Assam. Now, when it enters into Bangladesh, it is joined by Tista river and there it is known as Jamuna. and then it merges with Padma river, and then finally it drains into Bay of Bengal. Now, why Brahmaputra river is more suitable for generation of hydroelectricity? Because of its gradient. Okay, so from Tibet, when you talk about the Assam Valley, there is a reduction in the slope from roughly 2.82 meter per kilometer to less than 0.1 meter per kilometer. So because of this gradient, this becomes favorable for the hydropower electricity generation. Now, what is very unique with respect to Brahmaputra river? Its reversal in flow direction. In Tibet, it flows from west to east, and when it enters into India, in Assam, it would be flowing from east to west. Okay, so complete reversal in the flow direction. Then in Tibet, it completely flows in a very cold and a dry atmosphere, and it carries very less water and silt. The moment it enters into India, it is joined by multiple tributaries, left bank as well as right bank tributaries that we discussed right now, and then it, the tributaries bring a lot of water also as well as silt also, which is useful for the agriculture. And because of this huge silt load, this river basically forms braided channels like this. And because of this huge silt, we also see formation of riverine island. One of the famous riverine island is the Majuli riverine island, which is situated in Assam. So as I told you, UPSC has asked a question with regard to Brahmaputra river. So do solve this question and let us know your answers in the comment section. With this, let's move on to the next topic. So in the explain page of Indian Express, we have an article which talks about the polyandry marriage practices, and let's see what the law has to say on this particular marriage practice. This particular topic we can associate with the polity section of a prelim syllabus. So what has happened recently, a woman belonging to Hyati community from the Himachal Pradesh region, she has married two brothers. This polyandrous marriage tradition is locally known as Jodi Dharan in Himachal Pradesh. So Hyati community has been granted with a scheduled tribe status by the central government way back in 2022. Now let's just understand what is this polyandry marriage practice. So polyandry marriage practice is a form of marriage in which one woman would be having multiple husbands. We have different types of polyandry. One is fraternal polyandry, wherein all the husbands are brother, like in this case what has happened recently in Himachal Pradesh. This is done basically to preserve the family property and avoid the division of agriculture land. This is something which we see among the Hathis as well as the Toda community as well. We also have non-fraternal polyandry, wherein the husbands would be unrelated to each other. So the woman would be living with each of the husband in a rotational form of arrangement. Less common than fraternal polyandry marriage practice. Now, when it comes to polyandry, why it is being practiced in this Hathi community? Because they want to preserve their agriculture land so that they don't have to divide the agriculture land, and this is to reinforce family bonds also between the brothers and to provide more security to the women as well. Now, what the Indian law has to say when it comes to polyandry marriage practice? So, it is completely prohibited when you talk about the Special Marriage Act as well as Hindu Marriage Act of 1955. And this is also criminalized when you talk about Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. Now, there is an exception given to the scheduled tribe, okay, based on Article 342 of the Indian Constitution, because Constitution recognize the uniqueness when it comes to the customary laws of the scheduled tribe. And this exception is also witnessed in the Hindu Marriage Act of 1955, wherein we have section 2, subclause 2 of the act, which clearly states that the provision of this particular act would not be applicable to the scheduled tribes unless the central government by notification in its official gazette directs otherwise. Okay. In absence of such a notification, the Hathis continue to be governed by their own customary laws. Now, what is the relation between polyandry and the Uniform Civil Code? Because recently Uttarakhand has introduced Uniform Civil Code, which would be providing the legal framework when it comes to inheritance, marriage, divorce, adoption. But here also we see the exception when it comes to the scheduled tribes. Okay, therein also the Uttarakhand government in its Uniform Civil Code has stated that this would not be applicable to the scheduled tribes, going along with the constitutional morality. Okay, constitutional Article 342 as we discussed here. Okay, so it is in alignment with this particular constitutional article only. Now let's see what the court has to say on this particular issue. So court has been time and again interpreting the customary laws which are prevalent among the scheduled tribes, and it is seeing from the lens of the fundamental rights. And if the court founds that, okay, a customary law which is prevalent among the scheduled tribes is violating the fundamental rights, then in various cases, the Supreme Court has went with the fundamental rights and has done away with the customary practices. Let's see what all practices we are talking about. For example, when you talk about the triple talaq, in Shaira Bano case, the Supreme Court saw this customary practice being violative of Article 14 and 21. Okay, that is why triple talaq was declared unconstitutional. Then in 2018, in the Sabrimala judgment, another customary practice which was there, that is barring the menstruating woman from entering and offering prayers in the Sabrimala temple. Again, that practice, that customary practice was held unconstitutional. Why? Because it was violative of the woman's fundamental right related to Article 14, 15 and 21. And in recent judgment, in Ramcharan versus Sukhram, the Supreme Court has stated that when a custom is silent when it comes to inheritance of property by women, then there would be no restriction with respect to women inheriting the ancestral property. So, the court in this particular judgment has observed that the customs, just like law, cannot remain stuck in time, and others cannot be allowed to take refuge behind the customs or to hide behind them, depriving others of their right. This is something that you can use to write the conclusion whenever you are getting an essay or you are getting a question with regard to customary morality. You can also use this conclusion if you are getting a question with regard to customary morality in your ethics paper. That's all that we need to know with regard to newspaper article. Let's just make note of certain prelim pointers with regard to the Hathi tribe. So this is a scheduled tribe, as we discussed. They have been given the scheduled tribe status by the central government in the state of Himachal Pradesh. They are primarily found in Himachal Pradesh as well as Uttarakhand region. They inhabit the Himachal-Uttarakhand border in the basins of Giri and Tans river, which is the tributary of Yamuna. Why they are named as Hathi? Because they used to organize rural markets, okay, which are known as hats. Historically, they were vendors of, producers of wool, meat, etc. in these markets. So, because they used to organize the hats, that is why the name Hathi is being given to this particular tribe. I'm sorry if I'm not able to pronounce the name properly. Then, we witnessed two prominent clans. One is in Himachal Pradesh, one is in Uttarakhand. Then what are the cultural and social features with respect to this particular tribe? So Hathi men basically wear white headgear on ceremonial occasions. How is their community governance? So they have a traditional council called the Kumbli, which would be regulating the matters related to their customs. And when you talk about the marriage practice, we have right now discussed that polyandrous marriage practice is quite prevalent among them, basically to preserve their agricultural land, provide security to the woman and to maintain the family bond which is there. That's all that we need to know with regard to this particular topic. Let's move on to the next topic. So, recently USA has stated that they would be exiting UNESCO. This particular topic you can associate with GS paper 2, important international institution and agencies. Now, first thing that you need to make note of is this is not the first time USA is leaving this particular institution. They have done it way back in 2018 when the Trump was the president, and again they joined it in 2023 when Biden was the president. Now again after 2 years they are stating that we would be exiting from UNESCO. And why they are saying so? Because of the recent UNESCO decision to admit the state of Palestine as a member state. Now this particular decision of UNESCO, according to the Trump administration, it goes against the US policy because US actually is favorable to Israel. And that is why they think that this particular decision of UNESCO would be promoting anti-Israeli sentiments. So this is going to be the third time that USA has left UNESCO. And the decision, first reported by New York Post, this would be taking effect by the end of December 2026. Now will this US withdrawal be affecting the budget of this particular entity? The answer is yes, because USA used to provide a notable share of the agency's budget. But the UNESCO experts have stated that we were already mentally prepared for this particular scenario. Now let's make note of certain prelim pointers with regard to this particular entity. So it was founded in 1945. It is a specialized agency of United Nations. It is headquartered in Paris, France. And what is the main purpose? So purpose is to promote international collaboration in education, science, culture to build peace. How many members are there? So currently it is having 194 members and India was one of the founding members. It has 12 associate members as well. What are the key reports published by it? So it is Global Education Monitoring Report and Gender Parity Index. What are the flagship initiatives introduced by this particular entity? So we have the UNESCO World Heritage List also, and you need to tell me in the comment section that how many sites from India are there in the UNESCO World Heritage List currently. Then we also have Man and Biosphere program as well, and 12 out of 18 India Biosphere reserves are a part of this particular program, and the latest edition was Panna Biosphere Reserve. What are the core functions performed by this particular entity? So it promotes peace through international cooperation, helps the countries in achieving the sustainable development goals, support the member states in eliminating illiteracy and expanding free education, encourage free exchange of ideas and knowledge through conferences and knowledge sharing platforms, and works to protect the natural environment and cultural heritage globally. And one more question you need to address in the comment section, that which sustainable development goal basically talks about the education. Okay, that's all that we need to know from today's analyst. Quiz would be coming right up next, so don't forget to practice the quiz and check your knowledge. Till then, keep smiling, keep learning. Have a very great day, all of you.